Hello and welcome back to Anna Rose Reads the podcast. I am your host, Anna, and this week is full of lots of exciting things, good news, big announcements, and wonderful guests. Most importantly, Claire Fuller joins me to talk about her most recent release, Hunger and Thirst. It's one of my favorite books that I've read all year, especially if you're a fan of gothic horror, if you're a fan of Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House, if you're a fan of any kind of feminist horror or love a good ghost story, this book is 100% for you. Claire and I talk about the inspiration for the book, the things that she kind of looked to whenever she was writing, the inspirations, the touchstones that she looked upon, and many of the different themes that the book explores. We stay spoiler free as always, but this is a conversation that you may enjoy better whenever you've read the book. It is a pretty in the weeds conversation, as I do really love this book, and I didn't want to pass up the opportunity to kind of really do a deep dive on it. So with that being said, if you haven't read it yet, which most of you probably haven't because it's just out today in the US, it has been on shelves earlier in the UK. So for my UK folks, please take a gander, take a full listen. But at the end of the episode, whenever I do my closing, I have plenty of really cool announcements that I want to make. So if you don't want to listen to this right now, totally get it, but make sure that you stick around for the announcements at the end. Here's some good news, and then check back once you've read the book. It's easily in my top 5 books that I've read this year. So without further ado, here's Miss Claire Fuller. Hello, Claire. Thank you so much for coming on Anna Rose Reads the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm very well. It's lovely to be here. Really nice to meet you.
Yes, it's really lovely to virtually meet you. And you are in the UK, correct?
That's right. Yeah, in
Yeah.
the south of England, kind of about an hour from London, out in the countryside.
Very nice. Yeah, I have some friends who live a little bit all around the UK and Manchester and north of England and all that kind of good stuff. And I wish that I was more geographically well versed in where everything's at. But everything just seems, close enough over there compared to here.
Yeah.
You get in a car and you have to drive 3 hours to go visit your friends sometimes, which, seems to
That
not
would
be a
be
thing
all.
over there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's not. That would kind of be almost the whole of England.
Yeah, that's what I've
Yeah.
heard. Oh man. Well, I'm really thrilled to get a chance to talk to you today. You have a book that's coming out. It's already been out in the UK, but it is coming out on June 2nd here in the US. It is called Hunger and Thirst. If I have become familiar with your work and reading this book and doing some research on you before we chat, but do you want to just briefly introduce yourself for my listeners if they're not familiar with your work and your upcoming release?
Yeah. I'm Claire Fuller. I am the author of 6 novels, all published in the UK and published in the US by Tin House, which is now part of Zando. From the first, which was published in, I think it was 2015. You probably might know better than me. I don't know. Which was our Endless Numbered Days. And then, yeah, several others, which have all done pretty well. Won some prizes in the UK, the Costa Novel Prize and the Desmond Elliott Prize, and various other things. And then my latest, Hunger and Thirst, which, yeah, only a couple of weeks ago came out in the UK, which is about Ursula, who is a famous and successful sculptor. She is being hounded by a true crime documentary maker about the events that happened in a house called the Underwood in 1987. And so we revisit that time period when Ursula was 16 and she met a girl called Sue who dares her to do various things, including finally to kill someone. And when Ursula actually does, she is haunted for the rest of her life.
That is a excellent synopsis elevator pitch that I far better than I could ever do because I tend to ramble. But yeah, so I picked up Hunger and Thirst last week. I just mentioned it before we started recording. I absolutely tore through this book. Once I was kind of entrenched with these characters, I was very deep in it with them. And I do want to ask, you said this is your sixth book. How is it the publishing process and the release process gotten for you? Has it gotten any easier? Does it still feel the same? Like how has it been for you now that you're on book number 6?
It's still really scary.
Yeah.
I find it really hard to write. That's still the same. I don't enjoy writing. I like editing.
Yeah.
And I like I like the thought of a book being published. I think, oh yeah, it's coming, or you have to wait so long sometimes, sometimes it's a year or 18 months after a publisher has bought a book before it actually kind of hits the shelves, and you think, oh, it's so long, it's so long. And then it comes around and you think, what? No, please don't publish my book. I don't want anyone to read it. Please don't anyone look at it. I just want to go and get a job in a shop or driving trucks or something else. Please, anything else, anything else. But then obviously it comes out and you get some nice reviews and you think, phew, that's okay. But it's all still kind of scary stuff. You're putting your work out there is a frightening thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big vulnerability, I mean, like you spend all this time with the story for so long and it's just kind of you in the story. I mean, there's editors and agents and things that get involved, but for the most part, this is like a brain baby that you are putting out into the world and saying,
I
please be
like
careful
that.
with it.
Brain baby. Yeah, and someone looks at your baby and they say, "Oh my God, you've got such an ugly baby." You think, "No, I love my baby." Or maybe it's a little bit ugly. I don't know.
I would say you have a very beautiful brain baby with others, but I do want to go ahead and ask kind of where this novel began for you. I feel like I saw on social media you had said something about how this one had kind of been with you for some time, this story. And so if you want to just talk about where maybe the nexus of like, your initial idea for this novel and kind of the journey in writing it, those kinds of things.
Mm. Um, I mean, lots of things come together really
Hmm.
to start a novel, but I had written a short story for a competition which didn't get anywhere, but it was about a young woman in 1987 who goes to a dinner with her colleagues, and she doesn't quite know how to behave. She's a little bit odd. When everyone's getting dessert, she asks for another steak. Yeah, she's a bit peculiar, and one of her colleagues accuses her of being brought up by animals. And then she meets this other young woman who is kind of friendly to her, but also maybe a little bit odd. And that's all that it was. But I was quite intrigued by these characters, so I thought that I wanted to write on. And that scene, more or less as it is in the book. It is a
Hmm.
dinner that Ursula goes to with her colleagues. But I knew that couldn't be the beginning. I needed to find out a bit more about what took her there, who she was, where she lived, all those kinds of things. I didn't know. I don't plan. So I just needed to start writing to see what happened. And because I decided, for whatever reason, I can't remember that there was a reason, but it was set. I think it's because I decided to set it in this restaurant called a Bernie Inn, which
Hmm.
I don't know if you have those in America or you
We
did
don't
do.
know.
Okay. I'm not sure we have them anymore, but they were really a thing of the 1980s.
Yeah.
Bad taste, steaks, I don't know, just prawn cocktails, all that kind of stuff. And so I was trying to remember where I was in 1987 or around that time, and I was an art student. And so I put Ursula in the same town, but I make her she works in the post room of the art school. She's an outsider looking on. And then I also had to decide where she was going to live. And I put her in this bungalow, which is a squat, and which was the bungalow that I lived in 1989, which was a really weird place because the owner had gone on holiday to Australia to visit his daughter, and he decided never to come back, and he'd left all his things there. The house was owned by a housing association, so we squatted there, me and some friends, for a little while amongst all this man's belongings. It was very odd, creepy little house. Um, so those things kind of came together. And then I was also remembering that the girls who lived there in this house before me had told me this story about someone walking around the bungalow in the middle of the night and knocking on the windows from one window to the next. They never found out who it was. Obviously, somebody just playing a prank or deciding to terrorize them. Certainly not a ghost.
Yeah.
but but I that stuck with me. It stuck with me
Yeah.
for 40 years or however long that was. So all those things kind of came together for this novel.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like, you know, the period that you're talking about, like the period of being in art school, um, that time of your life, I feel like is very formative. Like those are the things
Mm.
that kind of stick. So and also when you're working in an art space and like I draw and I paint, so like like I have very vivid memories of like working on pieces whenever I was in high school and kind of like what was going on in my life around the time that I did those pieces. So I when I was reading, I felt like having all of this centered tangentially around the art school experience and art was really, really interesting for me because I think in some ways the book feels a little metafictional in that way about trying to find your place with art and understand art and all those things. Because like you said, Ursula is on the outside. She's working in the post room and a lot of these characters are, in this art school, but not there to create art and they're finding, different ways that they want to be involved, but they're not necessarily there yet. And I do want to go ahead and kind of ask, we get this whole novel from Ursula's point of view, which is really, really interesting to me. And I have a really fun time reading books from the first person narration point of view because I love a good unreliable narrator. And sometimes it's very apparent whenever a narrator is unreliable because they seem like a little, I don't know, facetious. Like there's a very clear, there might be some ulterior motives. But what I have a really interesting time with is the sincere characters who you have to remind yourself that you're getting this story through them and it's just their experience. And so I kind of wanted to ask you about your decision to write this novel from that point of view and whether or not you view Ursula as a reliable narrator or unreliable, and if there is such thing as a reliable first person narrator.
I think when I wrote that short story, it was from Ursula's point of view, and I do always consider point of view and what would work best in whatever story I'm writing. But once that short story was in first person, then I started writing the rest of the novel in first person, and at some point, I'm sure I would have thought, should I write this in third person or from several people's point of view? But I can't remember. At some point, I thought, no, I'm sticking with Ursula. This is working for me. And if something's working, then I don't always go on and kind of second guess it or question it again. It's good if it's working. That's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But yes, she's a really interesting one in terms of unreliability because she tells this whole story completely believing it herself. So on one level, as the reader, you could go along with her and be completely convinced. And so she's telling a story about some supernatural happenings, possibly possession, possibly kind of people coming up from the dead, or all sorts of things. It's never really explained because it's from her point of view. She doesn't know the answer to these things. So you have to, as the reader, experience them with her and not really ever necessarily get an explanation. But because, as I said, she does kill someone, she feels enormous guilt and terror. And just, yeah, she wants to do something about that. So she
Yeah.
confesses to lots of people, to the man she lives with, Vince, to her social worker, to the police eventually. And no one believes her. So that was quite an interesting kind of spin on the unreliable narrator. So I
Yeah.
think that maybe adds a layer of oh, we really ought to believe her because she's really trying to tell the truth so many times. But then it also plays into how much the reader believes in the supernatural or wants to go with it, because there is also a kind of psychological, real life reason for all the things that happen. So you could read it either way.
Yeah, it's really fun to kind of sit with it and think about it in both ways. Like you're saying, like there is that level. And I read a lot of horror fiction, like, straight up genre fiction, and then, like I do read literary and speculative. But my favorite thing that the speculative fiction, genre does is it toes the line of believability of like, you have the very logical explanation, or you can read it as, this is what's, going on. And I think for me, one of the biggest points of interest in reading horror in general is the believability aspect. And I think, like as women, we're always kind of up against whether or not we're believed and that
Yeah.
kind of thing. So it's always really interesting to me what that looks like for a person and what that looks like for a character. And I think some of the most tense chapters that I read in this book are the ones where Ursula is like really, she's just like, for lack of better words, she's emotionally in the trenches because she is riddled with guilt and she's paranoid and she's damn frightened and nobody's listening to her. And ironically, that's I mean, it's the same way that, in a horror novel, when a little kid's like, there's a ghost in the attic and nobody wants to
Yeah.
believe them, to see it flipped in this way whenever you have an adult, or a soon to be adult person who is fessing up to something that they should not want to talk
Yeah.
about, and they're being brutally honest, and then to have them not be, it was just a really interesting lens to view believability, especially, with a female perspective. But how
Mm.
did it feel to write that for you? Like those are some really intense chapters where we're sitting with her, and like you said, in this guilt and in this, kind of paranoia and fear. What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I think it comes back to the first person as well. When you're writing first person, it does really feel like you're inhabiting
Yeah.
that character. You There comes a time when you are them and you're seeing the world through their eyes. And so, like I said, I don't plan. So I once I decided that Ursula was going to confess, and the first time she does, she's not believed. She had just had to keep doing it. She had
Yeah.
to keep confessing, and I was kind of just as frustrated. And then eventually, she kind of has to live with that. She has to live with the guilt and the terror that of what she's done and what might be coming for her or what might happen next. And it was quite heavy to write those scenes, quite kind of emotionally challenging, I suppose. And some of it comes from the fact that Ursula was brought up in care in I think in the US you say foster care,
Hmm.
in children's homes and in a foster family for a little while. And so I did a lot of research into people who have been in that situation because I have no personal knowledge of it. And I interviewed lots of people, lots of adults who had been in care or been foster parents or looked after children's homes. And one of the things that kind of seemed to come out again and again is the question of their believability,
Yeah.
that there there is an awful lot of prejudice about people who've been in the care system and what the authorities especially suppose them to be or not to be. And unreliable is one of those assumptions.
Yeah.
So I was kind of playing with that as well, I suppose.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it unfortunately like that is, my experience with, the foster care system and kind of like my understanding of how that works. That I have a degree in psychology, so we touched upon things of that nature, whenever I was studying that. That is very much, the case. And especially in the case of children, there's always the question of, is their perception do they just not have the vocabulary to understand what they've endured? And so, the story that we're getting, is it just in their own terms and their vocabulary versus, the quote unquote adult real life understanding that we all may know? But, in this case, Ursula is 17. I think everybody's like around 16, 17 in this book, correct?
She's 16, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so like on the precipice of young adulthood. And so I think and it's such an interesting time to kind of talk about this and that point of your life. Whenever you're a teenager, everything is so intense and, emotional on a normal day, much less in this situation, right? And that it kind of brings me to my next point. There's a really, to me, in reading about Ursula's time at the Underwood, it felt very gothic to me. And you talk about how these characters move into this house where all of these belongings are still there. Like you're basically self-inserting into somebody else's life. And
Mm.
you said that you had that experience as well. And that in itself is kind of haunting because there's somebody else that's already been there and you're just living amongst their things. Do you feel like it was like your intention to write kind of a goth? Like, do you view this as a gothic story, like a modern gothic, or is this just part of the story that you wanted to tell and like any gothic feelings are a side effect?
I think they probably are just a welcome addition
Yeah.
to the kind of creepy, uncanny unsettlingness, which I'm really welcome to. They are welcome to calm
Yeah.
those kinds of feelings, or if readers pick up on that, I really love kind of gothic, modern gothic fiction. Um, and I can see that there are some things, like you said, kind of moving into someone's house with all their stuff there. And Ursula is almost kind of like a ghost in her own house in the way that she moves amongst all these things and puts everything back where she thinks it should be. Um, but I suppose with kind of generally with Gothic fiction, there is a big house. It's not suburban.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something weird with the architecture. So it's kind of, I guess it's a flip side of Gothic. You
Yeah.
could see it as Gothic, but it kind of looks at it from a just
It's
kind
like that
of
mo
round the corner.
Yeah, it's like that modern lens, I feel like, of like if we were to tell a gothic story now, if we were going to thematically explore like the themes of isolation, the haunting, kind of feeling. And like uh Ursula and Sue, the friend that she makes, and then Vince, who's the man that she lives with or the guy that she lives with, their time there in the house feels very kind of insular. Like when they're
Mm.
there, or at least for me in my reading experience, it felt like there was very little going on in the outside world. Like all of their plans that they were making and everything else going on was like secondary to whenever they were at the Underwood. When they were at the Underwood, that was like front and center. And so I think that probably led to those gothic feelings that I felt whenever I was reading it.
Mm.
But yeah, I kind of love though that we're getting this cross-pollination or this examination of what it would look like possibly in a modern setting or in a suburban setting or just something that's not necessarily, an old haunted house with boarded up
Yeah.
windows and bats flying out the window, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's a modern, well, the 1950s bungalow. Yeah, but I was also just thinking as you were speaking that there's a lot of kind of obsession in Gothic novels, aren't there? And there's definitely some obsession going on here between different characters and what they really want. So in that way, there's some Gothic stuff coming in too. Yeah.
Yeah, that does bring me to another good point, though, that I wanted to discuss with you, and that is the relationship between Sue and Ursula. And I think that, you were talking about how you wanted to, or you interviewed and you talked to a lot of people who were involved in the foster care system or the child care system. And I know, like attachment styles and disorders and the way that people attach whenever they've been, abandoned or neglected or they've had something really traumatic happen to them really, kind of informs how they make and form other relationships. And I feel like that is essential and key to what happens between Sue and Ursula. And I just kind of it in some ways it felt very typical of a female friendship, regardless of all of everything else. Whenever you find someone that you are kind of infatuated with, that you want to do the same things as them, that you're excited about them, and you kind of want to like be in their life, permanently in a way. But then, this added layer of Ursula's past and kind of what she's been through really adds to that experience in this book. So I just kind of wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about their relationship because I find that aspect really, really fascinating. And it was oddly very relatable, in some
Mm.
parts.
Yeah, because Ursula is 16 and Sue is 18, and Sue is without doubt the kind of dominant character in this female friendship. And they both kind of want slightly different things. Sue is looking for a friend, but there's some indications that she's had someone before as a friend that she's then cast off. And so, it doesn't feel particularly healthy that she's looking for someone like Ursula, who is more vulnerable, more needy. And Ursula definitely kind of fits that role. And really, I think Ursula is extraordinary, but she wants to be ordinary. And Sue is ordinary and wants to be extraordinary by being this film director. Um, and so it's not only Sue that Ursula falls for, it's her whole family that she kind
Hmm.
of wants to slot in to this ready-made family and just be part of. And that kind of doesn't work out exactly as she wants. And then Sue, she can't keep a secret. So, that becomes very problematic. So there's all these kind of things going on that aren't going to work out well for them. And I think the reader can probably see that coming, that, this is a difficult relationship. It's not on equal terms at all. But there are some moments, I hope, where they get on and you feel like Sue is being gentle and kind and encouraging with Ursula about particularly about her art,
Yeah.
saying that she's a really good sculptor and she should go to art school. And then they have some kind of banter together, and then Ursula is a very hairy woman, and Sue is not at all dismissive of that, whereas other people have been in the past and will be in the future. But she's just saying, let it all hang out. That's fine. She's quite a good feminist, Sue, and she
Yeah.
teaches she teaches Ursula some of that because Ursula has idea, no idea about feminism at all.
Yeah, that was quite as strange as it might sound, I really enjoyed that scene and that dynamic between them. And Sue for all of her quirks and kind of she was kind of quick to change her mind or to act very quickly on the impulses that she wanted to do. And that's why her family was, like she could pick up and leave at any given moment. That would be something that she would do that's on brand for her. But I will say the seeing the talent in Ursula and kind of enabling and helping her grow as an artist was really, really touching. And then the same kind of acceptance of like, this is just what it is. There's no reason to have shame in this or, to
Yeah.
be a woman. And we really, honestly, we really see it kind of come out. And there's two big film mentions, or it was really more of the Stepford Wives. There, Sue and Ursula watched the Stepford Wives, and they're kind of like talking about it. And it to me, it felt like a really big focal piece of like the middle of the book. And then later on, Sue wants to be a director and make films, and she wants to make horror films, which I think is particularly interesting to me. And there are some other films that are mentioned. I think Ursula kind of references Wendy in The Shining. It's at one point, and then or Rosemary's Baby comes up at another point as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to ask you about one, the choice to have Sue be interested in horror at this point, because again, this is an 87. So, I almost it feels slotted and modern for now, but that would have been very progressive then, I feel like. So that felt like a really big choice, and I wanted to hear about your decision to kind of have her interest lean that way?
It just kind of all linked together. If I'm writing a horror novel and someone's interested in making film, they're going to be interested in making horror film. It would just kind of be weird not to. And then she does make a short horror film.
Yes.
Um, and you're right. I think for now it feels like, yeah, there are horror films made by women. There ought to be more. And, this is something that is much more kind of topical. And yeah, we talk about it. But in 1987, I think no one was talking about that stuff. No one was noticing even that there weren't any female film directors or hardly any, full stop. Sue kind of mentions that in the Oscars she talks about.
Hmm.
So and she's very cross that she wasn't let into the film school department at the art school. So she is kind of setting out to try and change the world. And I did consider, if they're going to be really into film and watching horror films, should they be watching horror films from the 1980s? Because this is
Yeah.
1987. Should they be more contemporary to them? But well, there was a number of reasons why not. Firstly, I wanted to write about the films that I love.
Yeah.
I'm writing a
So
novel. I'm
fair.
going to write about the things that kind of have moved me. And those three, well, there's loads of horror films that I love, but I had to pick films that were obviously pre-1987. There's plenty of contemporary horror films that I love, but those three I have watched many, many times, and it gave me an excuse to watch them even more. But then they did somehow start resonating in all sorts of ways with Hunger and Thirst, possibly because those three were novels originally,
Yeah.
also great, great novels. Um, and I think they all have some kind of slow build towards the horror. No, they're not straight in there with the gore or anything. I
Yeah.
mean, some of them get nasty, but not too nasty. And they feel like very character-driven novels. They are definitely horror, but it's a slow build. And that seemed to work with what I was writing, that it feels the same thing. The horrible things don't start until quite late on in the book. I'm happy to spend time with character development. But then, it was great fun writing about those films. And I put in all sorts of, some of them more obvious, some of them very subtle, kind of Easter eggs
Yeah.
for these films. There's a point where somebody talks, like in The Shining with the finger. But then also, Ursula makes some phone calls from a phone box, and she pretends to be speaking to somebody, and she more or less says the same conversation that Rosemary has when she's in the phone box in Rosemary's Baby. So there's about 10 or 15 kind of little things like that for people who know these films well that might be able to spot them.
Yeah, I really there's nothing I love more whenever an author leans into what they love and it comes through. I very much felt that when I was reading the book, and thematically speaking, the films that you chose to include, not just because you love them, but because they do work thematically, went a
Mm.
really, really long way, for me in connecting with the girls and connecting with both Sue and Ursula. And, I think it adds a little bit to the tragedy of it all because, whenever, if you're a horror reader and you have these interests and then you see what happens to these characters, kind of the emotional turmoil that they, suffer, you see a bit of yourself kind of suffering in the same way, like up against some of these similar things. And I kind of wanted to talk about the tightness of which you wrote certain scenes in this book. In particular, there is a scene that you include that finger tapping that you mentioned that, that you experienced that, you heard about in the house and just kind of this like real haunting experience that Ursula goes through. I genuinely like I developed a stomach ache and I was reading the book and my husband like looks over at me and I'm like I'm sitting here like this like I'm like whatever. And he's like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "I'm going through it right now." He's like, "Well, you can put it down." And I'm like, "No, I can't. Like I gotta find out. Like I gotta get through this. I gotta find out what happens." That
I feel like
that
my job is done.
yo, it's tenfold. But I want to ask, I know that you said emotionally writing kind of prolonged in this state with this book is kind of difficult, but I want to talk about that scene in particular and your writing experience with it because it was incredibly tense to read. It was very like physically affecting. There's a scene with a mail slot and somebody trying to get in the house potentially and all these things and it just was so effective, you know?
It was funny because because I really remember that bungalow because like you say it's a very formative time. I was no 20, 21, something like that, can't remember.
Yeah.
And obviously I wasn't there when anyone tapped on the window or put anything through the letterbox, but the the layout and just really really closely remembering that actual house really helped,
Yeah.
absolutely helped because the layout sometimes somehow helped. The parquet floor in the hall, the fact that the front window was frosted so you
Yeah.
can't quite see through it, the fact that there was no telephone in the house. All these things were real from real life, and I think they probably kind of helped it feel real to the reader. And it all did just come out on the page when I was writing.
Hmm.
So those scenes were there from the beginning, but then there is so much editing,
Yeah.
like a year of editing to, is this scene too fast? Is it too slow? Have I remembered the temperature? Have I remembered the sound? What else is going on? Who might be arriving? There's a lot of kind of fine, fine, fine detail so that it gets to the stage where I'm looking at every single word. Is it exactly the right word in the right place? So there's some real kind of fine tuning by the end of it. And then, of course, it goes to my editors, one in the
Hmm.
UK, one in the US, who then also give their input, oh, this scene is now too slow or something.
Yeah, it's a fine balance, but the closest reading experience that I had with this particular kind of dread, I think was, and I just read The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson for the fall, like this past fall for the first time. And
Oh,
there's the scene when they're running through the woods and it's Eleanor and Theo, and like Theo looks back at something and Shirley Jackson never says what it is, but it's just so
mhm.
dreadful. And your imagination is left to come up with the really bad thing, right? And that's super effective. And you kind of do that whenever Ursula brings over one of the friends that she had from the group home that she was living in. And he comes over and he sees something and he just leaves. And it's very
Yeah.
abrupt. And that those two scenes to me mirrored the same kind of like unknown dread. You don't have to name a thing for it to be. It's almost worse to not name the thing. And I was very curious about kind of your decision to write that scene that way too. To not name whatever it is that he saw.
Yeah. I think it's always so much better in film and in novels where you don't see the monster
Yeah.
because we can create a much worse monster than could ever be described. You know, Sometimes, you have a vision. I'm reading a book at the moment. I won't say what it is, but there is a trunk and there's something in it, and then suddenly we see that thing, and I'm kind of thinking, oh, is that all it is? Because in my head,
It
before I
was,
saw the monster, it was so much worse.
yeah.
So, there are points in Hunger and Thirst where Ursula does see things,
Hmm.
but they're still people. We never see a monster. So when John comes to the house and he looks through the kitchen window, and because we're in Ursula's point of view, she doesn't get to see it, but he's so horrified that he runs away. And her social worker comes, and she's
Yeah.
so disturbed by the house that she runs out the house and throws up in the flower bed. But you still, because we are Ursula, we don't quite know why. It doesn't have quite the same effect on her.
Yeah. I really love those two. I feel like both of those instances, even though they may not have been, quite, they were not with Ursula when she's really, kind of having her real, I call it like the great bad terrible night, that really bad, haunted
Yeah, yeah.
experience for her. Even though they were not there for that, those two scenes do so much legwork in building the terrible thing that Ursula does experience. And it's just one of those like helping hands things that, even though it's not on the page directly, it does so much work. What's not there is
Mm.
just as important as what is there, which is always kind of a hard needle to thread, I feel like sometimes, because you can, especially with horror, I feel like you can be really heavy-handed and wanting to be like, see, his isn't how scary this is, like all
Yeah.
of these things. But like you said, pulling away and letting someone's imagination fill in those blanks is always so much worse.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. My
Yeah.
imagination with those things always just runs wild. Yeah.
Yeah, you can just
But
conjure up the worst
yeah,
things.
yeah. Maybe some readers though also I don't know, do they want things spelled out? They're not going to get it in my books anyway, so
Yeah.
if they do.
Listen, I mean there are those books where they do spell it out, and sometimes those are, sometimes what you're in the mood to reach for, but I do tend to have a lot of fun with me filling in the blanks of how terrible something could
Yeah.
be. And it feels more personal that way too, because what you're afraid of and what I'm afraid of and what the guy next door is afraid of is very, very different. So who's to
Oh,
say,
absolutely.
what somebody is seeing, like even if this is my favorite thing to think about is even hypothetically, even if Ursula did look out the kitchen window and see, and then her and John did have a conversation afterwards, I love the idea that they wouldn't have seen the same thing, that their
Yeah.
abject fear is so subjective that whatever they saw would be so different.
Mm.
Because I think in particular, they are very defined by their experiences and they've had two very different experiences. So no, it's a fun little thought experiment that I kind of like to sit
Mm.
with and toy with.
Mm.
But I do also want to talk about the title of the book because hunger and thirst does come up quite a bit in the book itself. Not, like in a cheeky way, but like thematically.
Mm.
Ursula, whenever she's discovering her art and her artistry, she talks about hunger a lot, and that's like some of the first artistic feedback that she hears when she's working at her job is like this art isn't hungry enough. And I think for her hungering for connection, success, stability, all of these things really comes through. But then, you describe her art pieces and there's an element of hunger to those. And I kind of wanted to let you just talk about coming up with the art pieces that she created because they're super creative. And I'm very interested in how you kind of created those for her.
Yeah, and I was thinking a lot about hunger. So there is she does a lot of drawing where kind of almost auto drawing where
Yeah.
she is in the flow or is possessed and she starts drawing wide open mouths and things falling in. And then when she does her first carving, it is someone with an open mouth and someone else kind of being swallowed. And then she also creates a bear out of wood. She carves out of wood, and inside is a stone woman, as if potentially, I mean, it could be a fetus, but maybe the bear could have swallowed it also. So there is a lot of that kind of hunger, I guess, hunger in all sorts of ways. But that so there's a first carving that is described that isn't created by Ursula, but she goes into the studio at the art school and looks at it, and she speaks to a lecturer there about it, and it is described as hungry. But she is quite critical of it, and that was actually my very own first wood carving
Really?
of ribs and intestines, which I still have a photograph of, but the actual piece is long gone, rotted away. And then a little while later, Ursula goes back into the studio and she meets the sculptor of that piece. who's just sitting there smoking a cigarette with an unhappy mouth, which is also me. So I gave myself a cameo in this novel. Maybe if it ever gets made into a film, they'd let me just go and sit in the studio. Oh no, I'd be a bit old actually, wouldn't I? Yeah,
No,
I'm not
you
sure
could
that
be.
would work.
Art students can be any age. I
And
love that.
a
I love that you
mature,
put that in there.
a mature student. Um, and then there's a big description of the bear that she carves with
Yeah.
the stone woman inside, which is called the Lithopedion, which is kind of inspired by something that Ursula learns, which is that some women, if they have an ectopic pregnancy, the fetus can become calcified and remain in the body and then sometimes not be discovered for years and years and years. And this happens to Sue's aunt, so Ursula learnt about that. But it was such fun. It was enormous fun to describe a sculpture as if I had carved it without having to do any of the work. It was just, wow, why bother being a sculptor when I could just write it?
Yeah, I imagine it's far less time consuming. And I try to think
Yeah,
about it in terms of describing like a painting or a drawing. I mean, and you do have descriptions of drawings in this book, but you
yeah,
know, the amount of time that goes into an art piece, I think
yeah,
I would love for somebody, or hell, maybe I'll try and write it one day. We'll see. But the psychosis that you sometimes enter as an artist from working on the same thing for so long is
yeah.
truly maddening. Like I've done some paintings that I spend like the whole day working on them and then I just get so sick of it. You know, like you have this really toxic love-hate relationship with your own work. And I feel
Like a
like, you know,
novel.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel like you hit upon that in this book in a really kind of metafictional way because, you know, this is a book. This is a piece of art too that you wrote
Yeah,
yourself. So yeah, it was really interesting to read about those things because I felt I related a lot to kind of this needs to be hungrier, this needs to be sharper, this needs to be whatever, and then you kind of just, you know, the disillusionment that you kind of get with your own self is
yeah.
really relatable. But there's also the thirst part of this title that comes up in a very, you know, different way that I don't want to say exactly what it is because I don't want to spoil it, but certain people after experiencing certain things, they keep saying that they're thirsty. And then they go to get a drink of water and there's flies involved and all this good stuff. So I wanted to let you talk a little bit about the thirst. If there was, you know, kind of some deeper stuff going on there. I know, you know, like I just talked to another author about this because it was in their book, you know, excessive thirst is a sign of like possession, you know, and some people say and all these things. But I kind of wanted you to just maybe fill in some of those blanks about maybe what the thirst element is.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, apparently chugging water
Oh,
like crazy is a sign of possession.
oh, I had no idea. I mean, there's kind of two reasons. So in Hunger and Thirst, firstly, there is a point where Ursula is in Morocco with her mother when she's a young child, and she's locked in a bathroom, and very awful things happen. And she has been told that she can't drink the water,
Yeah.
the water out of the tap. So she is very thirsty for a long time, and then she finally just drinks the water and thinks she's going to die probably from drinking the water. Obviously, she doesn't. So in the way that I was talking about how this novel could be read as horror or could be read as all kind of psychological trauma, that PTSD that is coming up again and again for Ursula. So all the thirst, the other
Hmm.
characters or the horror could just be in Ursula's imagination and just because of the stuff that she's gone through as a child. But then once I had decided on the name, I was also kind of thinking about, or the title, sorry, I'd also was thinking about what hunger means and what thirst means, and how hunger is kind of something we would like, something we desire, something that would be nice to have, and thirst is a necessity.
Yeah.
So all these characters, I was also thinking about what do they desire and what do they actually need.
Yeah.
And so there are, for Ursula, she would like a family, but what she needs, I mean, it's almost the same. She needs to belong. She needs to belong somewhere, to someone, to have some human connection. Sue desires to be a film director of horror movies, but what she is thirsty for, what she really, really needs, I think, is freedom, probably.
Yeah.
And then Vince also, he desires Sue, but I think he needs forgiveness. So
Yeah.
I could go, they all kind of have this. I did think about it. It seemed to work.
Yep, no, definitely. And it's really interesting to hear that and to kind of sit with that in terms of where, kind of everybody ends up and, what happens to them. And I do want to talk about the way that you decided to end this novel. It was just a gut punch. The last, I think, 40, 50 pages, I was reading late into the night and just distraught by the time that I got through. Um, did you always have kind of this ending in mind, or did it take a few kind of iterations? And I just kind of want to hear about the ending for you and kind of where you decide to leave things at the end of it all.
I think that ending, it's a bit like the beginning. The ending was always there, always that was going to happen, what happens, but it was written in a kind of crappy way. So the first draft was not good, and then it gets refined and refined and refined, and I bring in the lift because somebody or something is coming to Ursula, and she has to decide whether or not she's going to let it in. And I don't think that's a spoiler because it's actually in the very
Yeah.
first paragraph of the novel. So without saying what or who it is, but she's in her flat, and really, there is no action. That's the interesting thing. You kind of need some scariness, but there's actually really nothing happening. And so I had to create that from the surroundings. So it's really, I think, the lift that it's the sounds she hears. So she can hear the lift going up. And I've forgotten who it is. Is it Helen Mirren or some
I
famous
think it was
actresses?
Julie Dench, I think. Is that her
Judi
name?
Dench,
Yeah,
that's
Julie
right,
Dench. There
Judi
it is. Yeah.
Dench.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Judi Dench's voice,
Yeah.
well, it sounds like Judi Dench's voice, for I have no idea why I put that in. Um,
It's
Going
iconic and
up,
recognizable because I imagine exactly what that voice sounds like. So
yeah,
I know,
yeah. Third floor, fourth floor.
Yeah.
So you can hear it, the thing is coming. So all that got written in later.
Yeah.
The first draft was very, very basic, but that ending, that tragic, tragic ending, sorry everybody, was always there.
Yeah, it was one of those moments of, I think that the way the tone that you set and the atmosphere that you set, I mean, like even with the weather and just like the way that things play out from a certain point onward, it's like, oh no, we're going here, we're going here, we're going here, like the
Yeah.
inevitability, that hurtling towards a certain ending.
Yeah.
But I think I really, really love this book. And that maybe like one more thing I want to bring up is the true crime aspect of this, like the whole thing that kind of, I don't want to say kicks this off, but a really big element of this book is the fact that there is a documentary being made about what happened at the Underwood house, however many years ago at this point, and kind of everybody's reaction and Ursula's real reluctance and intense feelings around the documentary, not wanting to participate in it. I think we just live in a weird time where like the true crime documentary stuff is really blown up and there's a really weird relationship with all of it and the ethics of it and all these things. So was
Mm.
that kind of cathartic to write about? Because I feel like we deal with that on a pretty regular basis every time we see a
Yeah.
new crime documentary come out.
Well, I guess I ask questions about it. I don't provide the
Yeah.
answers, and I'm not sure what the answer is. I love true crime, and I feel really bad about loving true crime,
Yeah.
especially if the person that the stuff has happened to is not being interviewed, is not part of that true crime. It becomes really tricky because entertainment at someone's actual suffering, but I still do kind of watch it and in that way participate in it. But we are kind of discussing it these days much more. But I also reference a TV program that happened that was broadcast in the 1980s called
Yeah.
Crime Watch in the UK, which was essentially true crime. They were recreating crimes in order, supposedly, to find the perpetrator. But we all just watched it because of its kind of scary, grisly, oh my God, that didn't happen to me kind of
Yeah.
feeling. So it's been around for a long time. But I suppose you're right. You said it is what kicks it off, and I think that's correct actually, because Ursula wouldn't be revisiting all this without the documentary maker trying to find out what happened. But I quite like the fact that all that is going on. It's also a kind of film. I did think about it being a journalist or somebody writing a book, but no, it clearly had to be some kind of film. So I like all those layers. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a lot to kind of immerse yourself in, which I really appreciated because there's so many ways to kind of try and empathize with Ursula and where she's at and what she's wanting to reveal or wanting to revisit or not wanting to reveal or not wanting to revisit, all for, good means. I mean, when you hear about the things that she's been through, I mean, it's not a pleasant thing to look back on, much as the case with any traumatic event. But yeah, it's really funny because I just recently started watching the old Unsolved Mysteries, like from the original Unsolved Mysteries series, which we had in the US, which, like people called in and like they solved cases with that. Like that
Mm.
was a thing that happened. But it is, that kind of navel-gazy, why are we looking at this question, that I wrestle with myself as well because I'm also interested in it, but I don't know what it says about me that I am.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's a really just interesting lens to view this book. But thank you so very much for answering all of my burning questions about hunger and thirst. This is just such a thought-provoking novel, and I had all of these questions buzzing around my head when I was reading it, and I needed a way to exercise them, for lack of better words. I do want to go ahead and ask, what does the rest of your 2026 look like? Like book tour wise, are you working on anything? Do you have any other really like anything that we can promote or plug for you? I would love to talk about those things.
Yeah, I mean, there's a UK book tour kind of happening next week and the week after, but I'm doing a US online launch event on the 4th of June.
Okay,
So people
perfect.
can find that on my website, which is clairefuller.co.uk, or find me on Instagram, which is writer Claire Fuller. I'm often on Instagram, kind of talking about books. But it would be lovely if people could come along to that.
Yeah.
It's online, it's free, so it'd be good to see some faces.
Yeah, I'll definitely put the links to that in the episode notes for this episode. And I'm very curious, and I don't know if you're allowed to talk about it, but do you know are you working on another book or another project? And if so, do you know what direction you're heading with the next thing?
Yeah, I've only got about 4,000 words. So, and because I don't plan, I don't quite know what happens next, but there is some traumatic event that happens to a woman. And oh dear. And but then she kind of perhaps finds some solace or forgiveness or something from becoming a gardener. So there's going to be lots of nature, I think, in this book. I
I like
hope.
that.
Yeah.
I really like that. Nature it's always like I've had some really healing experiences, like getting to see the world and
Mm.
like being out in nature. It's really a profound experience whenever you have something like that. And it can be as small as just like being in the yard and seeing something happen, like a squirrel does something, you know what I mean? Or it can
Yeah,
be as
yeah.
grand as going to a national park and seeing wildlife that you've never fathomed being able to see before. So I'm very interested to see where
Mm.
that goes in that work. But thank you so much again, Claire. This has been really, really wonderful. Hunger and Thirst is going to be out on shelves on June 2nd in the US from Tin House. And just thank you so very much once more.
It's been great to speak to you. It's fantastic questions. Thank you so much.
All right. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is my conversation with Claire Fuller, author of Hunger and Thirst, one of my absolute most favorite reads of the year. I'm sure you can tell I adored this conversation immensely. Getting to chat with Claire was just so easy, and I really respect and feel like I understand where she's coming from on a lot of the things that she writes about in regards to her art and writing and the darker things that we tend to look to explain why we are the way that we are in this life. So yeah, if you have not heard of Hunger and Thirst yet, please go look it up. It is on shelves. It's going to be when this episode releases on June 2nd. Like I said, for my UK folks, this is going to have already been out on shelves for a while now, but I cannot recommend it enough. So please, please, please go pick up a copy. Now, this is where the big announcement time segment comes into play. First and foremost, I will be at StokerCon this week. I will be traveling in the middle of the week and then seeing everybody at the end of the week. I have one panel that I will be on for certain. That is the Buzzing About Books panel for Librarians Day. Come out. I'm going to be talking about 4 books that I really, really love for various different reasons. If you want to hear me talk about the books that I love, come out to Librarians Day. It is included in your normal StokerCon ticket package. It's a really lovely programming day. It's just like a full event talking about books, getting excited about books, and talking about how to get other people excited about books. It was one of my favorite days last year of just panels and engagement. So please, 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 if you're around, come stop by that panel. I've got some wonderful fellow panelists who will also be presenting some books that they really love that I think everybody needs to hear about. Additionally, I will be hanging around StokerCon in general. I don't know if I have resting bitch face. I don't know if I have RBF. I don't know if I'm approachable or not. But please come say hi. I literally went and bought a bunch of candy, and I'll have Advil and Band-Aids and maybe some Fireball on me. Who's to say? But always know, please come say hi. I will also have stickers as well. It's always lovely to meet new faces and new folks in the industry and in the community. So if you see me hanging around, just please feel free to come say hi. I don't want to be standoffish, and I'm sorry if I look like I'm angry. I have no idea whether I do or not. So all this to say, this is my disclaimer. Feel free to come by and introduce yourself. Now, moving on to the next bit of super, super exciting news. I am going to be part of an online magazine that is launching literally this week called Darker Times. What is this? Well, it's going to be an online publication. It's going to be horror criticism and commentary and writing and just engaging with the genre in a way that feels contemporary, feels modern, feels unique to us and our experiences, and it's also for the people by the people. Darker Times is going to be what's called worker owned, which means that me and the rest of the Darker Times team, there's 3 other members, one of which is Miss Emily Hughes, which you may all know as the author of Horror for Weenies, Jessica Woodbury, and Anjay Wilson. They are all fabulous contributors, brilliant people who bring plenty of expertise to the table. But we are going to be your Darker Times team. And what being worker owned means is that we are not really answering to anybody other than our supporters and subscribers, which is going to be hopefully you guys. We want to write criticism and focus on the horror media, whether that's film, television, books, video games, that the community is interested in at this time, at this current moment. We don't want to have to answer to shareholders or, somebody overseeing this from a business angle. We want this to be by the people and for the people. So that's what we're doing with Darker Times. It has been so cool to be working on this behind the scenes, kind of getting everything together, starting to think about pieces, starting to write some pieces for the site, and just building this kind of community almost in a way between, the 4 of us who are starting this, and then thinking about how we can build it out further and how Darker Times can be the horror publication that you all turn to for, your thoughts, to work out how you feel about things, how to see where the genre is at in all of its different mediums. So yeah, I'm incredibly honored and so thankful to have been brought in as part of this team. And yeah, we are going to be doing soft launch this week. So if you're at StokerCon and you want a free bookmark with a QR code on it to access the Darker Times website, come find us. As of the time that this episode is going to be airing, the Darker Times website will be up and running. It will be our soft launch. So we will be looking for subscribers if you're interested. But, just know that we are still getting things up and running. We are, getting the site built out the way that we want and kind of adding all the bells and whistles that, will make it a fully functioning site and publication, with enough time and effort. We're still getting off the ground, so to speak. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, please visit darkertimes.com. It's going to be in my social media. Darker Times has social media handles everywhere. It's going to be on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky. I will be promoting it on all of my socials, so odds are you've probably seen me promoting it already. Yeah, and I'm just really excited to be part of it, man. It's cool to be engaging with the genre in a different way and writing pieces that ask the bigger questions as to why we feel the way that we do about the horror that we consume and what it says about us and what it says about our current moment. So please, if you're interested in all, check us out. I think it'll be a really, really great publication. And it's going to be thanks to you guys, because it's going to be for people like us, by people like us, literally. So that wraps up my very, very lengthy outro with all of these announcements. In the meantime, I will be getting episodes out to you guys next week. There's no bonus episode this week. I will be out, traveling, so it's a little hard to swing that. But yeah, I'll be back in action next week, and I love you all. I will see you all soon, and until next week.